quickly through a lot of the things I learned. I used to be terrible at pitching my startup. Like when I first started, it took me over a year to raise capital. And I was just awful. But gradually, if you try something enough and you're critical enough, you do get better. So there is a way to improve. So let me give you first a little overview. So Founderspace is an incubator accelerator. I am the founder, Naomi's co-founder. We have other co-founders. All of us are really passionate about startups. So I love this. I do it because I loved it. I never thought Founderspace would turn into a real business. You know, I'd done a bunch of startups and I was doing it sort of as something you do when you want to take a break. And now it's become like a really good business. And Forbes ranked us the #1 accelerator for overseas startups. We work with a lot of startups here in Silicon Valley and a lot of startups all over the world. Inc. put us in the top 10. Entrepreneur ranked us #1 for overseas startups. So we've been doing a lot. As I mentioned, we have over 50 partners in 22 countries. I spend 70% of my time traveling, 30% here in Silicon Valley, but my partners are here all the time. So we're always doing stuff here. And we launched Founders Edge as a better way to help the startups that are in our program as well as other startups connect with our investors. Because it was very hard for us to scale the personal introductions. But if we can look at a startup, write up our analysis, which they know us personally, and then they can see what we think, it's a great way to share that. I'm also the author of this book, Make Elephants Fly. I've got a Chinese version, a Vietnamese version, a Taiwanese version, a Dutch version, a Korean version. It's all over the place, Japanese. It's a great book if you're a startup and you really want to figure out a lot of what I teach. So it takes you through how I go through startups' business models, how I go through their innovation cycles, and really help them get to the next level. And the book is, if you like how I talk, like you'll hear me tonight, if you like how I speak, the book is written in the same tone. I promise you one thing, it won't be boring. It will be kind of fun. It'll be fun to read, and there are a lot of case studies, so you should learn a lot at the same time. So perfecting your pitch, I'm going to go over some of the basics here. So one thing I tell startups is don't try to tell everything. You know, there's a big temptation when you're pitching to get everything into a pitch, especially like today, we're doing 3-minute pitches. You know, when I came to Silicon Valley, I'm older, we used to have 20-minute pitches. Now that seems like, oh my God, 20 minutes, and then it went down to 10, and then it went down to 5, and now some people are doing 3-minute and 2-minute and 1-minute pitches. But I found going below 3 is really hard. Like if you go below 3 minutes, it's even for a good person who's practiced a lot, it is hard to condense the main points. But at 3 minutes, if you know what you're doing, you can describe almost any business. And as Mark Twain said, you know, I would have written a shorter letter if I had more time, right? To do a great 3-minute pitch, a great one, takes a lot of time. To do a 20-minute pitch, anybody can do it. Or an hour pitch, you have so much time to blab on, they'll eventually figure out what you're doing. So when you're doing your pitch, there's one thing I want you to do. One thing. I don't, you know, most of us investors, we know the market, right? We hear enough pitches. We know all the different markets, we know all the different stuff. What I really want to know, up front, what does your product do? What is that great thing that your product does that nobody else does? If you can walk away out of 3 minutes and clearly explain that to me, you've hooked me. And the rest I'll meet with you. You know, then an investor will meet with you. They'll spend 45 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever they have going deeper, and then they'll meet again and again. But in those 3 minutes, just explain that unique thing that you have figured out that nobody else has figured out. And less. Just try to get rid of the other stuff. You can, show your team quickly, you can show the market quickly, you can show, your traction quickly, but spend most of the time just explaining what you do. Because most of us get lost and do what you do up front. Because if we don't know what you do, all the other stuff just flows on by, right? We're still thinking, what do they do? I don't get it. What do they do? They're telling me about the market now. They're telling me, about all this, their profit margins, their business model. But what do they actually do? Most people most entrepreneurs lose the investor because they never clearly explain what they do in a way that the investor goes, I get it. Tell a good story. Stories are always nice. In 3 minutes, you don't have as much time for a story. But when you're doing a longer pitch, it helps for us to know you. We want to know, like you told a wonderful story. It wasn't a wonderful story because it's kind of sad, but you survived. But you told the story about your son and yourself with the disease, and you made it personal. I all of a sudden felt a connection to you. I felt like, and I cared for you, and I saw why you're so passionate about this, and you did it all in under 30 seconds. I think your story was under 30 seconds. So that was really nice. If you can get a story in there, the story shouldn't just be a story, right? It should be explaining why you do the business and what the business is and what the value is. And if you can do that, really important. Practice and forget. So I'm a big believer when I do any of my presentations that I practice and practice and practice, and then when I get out there to do the pitch or do this presentation, I just don't even think about my script. So I saw like you reading a script. You don't want the script, right? What you want to do is just speak from your heart. You know your product, you know your customer, you know your market, you live and breathe this. So if you don't get all the information in there, it doesn't matter. When people walk away from a presentation, we forget 80% of what you told us. I mean, every human does, right? What we remember is this feeling we had. That's something I'm really interested in. I'm going to follow up on that. Or no, I'm not interested. So human beings are emotional. Emotion is how we sum up all this data we've received. And a big part of emotion is your presentation. So what you have to remember is it's not the amount of information you get in or even what information you get in. What's more important to that is how you communicate that information. So get it all down and then just speak from your heart when you get up there. Use body language. So body language tells a lot about people. I mean, unfortunately, human beings are used to have many biases, right? And we make judgments very quickly. And once we make a judgment, it's very hard to get us to change our initial bias. Like for a job interview, when people come in for a job, in the first minute, most people doing a job interview have already decided if they want to hire or not hire the person. Before they even open their mouth. How they look, how they dress, their body language, how they sit. We do this because in prehistoric times, or even today in some parts of the world, a stranger's coming down the street, you don't know if you can trust this person or not, and it's a life or death split-second decision. How they're walking, all these different things tell you whether you like them or not, or whether you should be afraid of them, and we process this unconsciously. That's the problem. We don't even know we're doing it. So in the media today, there's a lot of talk about bias, in hiring, whether it's gender bias or racial bias or cultural bias or things like that. We are, in our subconscious, it's there. Part of that is body language. So when you walk on stage, try to dress halfway decently, because everybody's gonna, you can be Zuckerberg, right? And walk in there with your sandals and your t-shirt and stuff, but Zuckerberg's sort of fitting a paradigm of what we expect like a young college programmer, hacker type guy to be, and investors have become used to, that I'll invest in, right? A young white male, who dresses in t-shirts and comes out of Harvard, that's my investment, it fits a stereotype we have. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. But everything you do will be messaging the investor. Whether you stand erect or whether you're not erect, how you, if you put your hands wide as opposed to like this, it makes a much more positive impression on people, unconsciously. So study this, figure this out, watch some videos on it, on YouTube, whatever you have to do. All these little things seem like they shouldn't matter, and if you're an idealist, you won't want to do it. But if you are a pragmatist like me, you'll figure this is how the human body, the human brain functions, and I need to communicate with that brain, with those brains out there. So I need to figure out on their subconscious, not on their conscious, how they're processing information. Stand out. When you go to present, don't try to do something different. You know, investors, like we have 4 investors here today. Well, 5, 6 total, yeah. But Wilson will have to leave, so we'll have 5. Investors investors, we see pitches every day, all the time, right? Especially if you're like me. I mean, yeah, I see, and John I know, because I know you personally, we see hundreds a year. And a lot of times they all blend together. So anything you can do to capture the investor's attention. And you had your product, right? And I said, bring your product out, you know? We want to see, if you have your product, if it's a physical product, bring it. Like, we want to see it. We want to see that it's real. You know, we want to look at it. If it's food, if you're doing a food tech startup, well, I was just in China, you know, a week ago, and at a big pitch thing, and one of the startups, they had this food startup, right, with this amazing kind of spicy plant or something. And they were describing all about how it tastes and everything else, and they didn't bring any samples for the investors to try. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what it tastes like, and I'm walking away from your pitch and I have no idea. You had a chance to like hook me, you know? The next day, because I went up to the entrepreneur and told her you have to bring samples, she came back with samples the second day of the conference. So I got to try it, and it was pretty cool. But really, do something to make them remember you. Remember, there's not just audio, right? There's visual that you can do, there's tactile, there's taste, all these different senses we have. If you use some of the other senses, you start to make a bigger impression. Now, let me give you a great example of a startup recently that I saw that got every investor's attention in the room. There's a normal pitch. Everybody had 3 minutes to do their pitch here in Silicon Valley. This entrepreneur walked up to the pitch, held up a little kind of like pea-sized device, and put it behind his ear, and he said, I will tell all of you that if you use this device and place it behind your ear, it will change your life forever. And then he walked off stage. He used like 20 seconds out of 3 minutes. He walked off stage. And you know what, after the pitch, all the investors went to his table. He had a table set up. Everybody was like, what does that device do? Like, and it was because he was different, right? And he caught everybody. They had to know. They had to know what he did. Now, I'm not saying that all of you should do that, but doing something different can get investors' attention. Yes.
What does the device do?
I'm not going to tell you. Watch their eyes. So when you are looking at the audience, look right into the eyes and try to pick friendly people that are paying attention. Because if you pick somebody who's on their phone, you kind of get this sinking feeling. I really must not be that interesting. But if you pick the people who are friendly, then you actually get energy from them. And by looking at people who are friendly in the audience, even though you're talking to one person, it feels like you're talking to everybody. It feels like a more natural conversation. You have this kind of back and forth, unconscious thing going on. Also, when you present to investors or anybody, this applies to any sort of public speaking, when you present, take mental notes. Don't do your same presentation the same way every time. What you're getting is feedback. Like the audience is telling you, if everybody's like paying attention to you and like really like focused on you, and you can kind of gauge them, like when are they most interested and when am I losing them? Then you know when they start to not pay attention, you have to change your presentation. You know when all of a sudden you see their eyes light up, you know when people do, that then you've hit something, and that's a really good point you should include in your next presentation. So every time I went out to pitch, once I became good at it, when I was first year, I was horrible, right? Finally raised venture capital, despite myself. But once I learned the techniques, every single time I would pitch to an investor, I'd spend a lot of time looking at them. And every time I would drive home in my car, I'd be editing my presentation in my head. I'd also be listening to what they said to me very, very, very closely. And I'd rewrite my PowerPoint, sometimes slightly, sometimes massively, but every time I'd redo my presentation. It's an iterative process, like a product. So qualify each lead. Not all investors are created equal. What you want to do is when you're talking to investors, ask what they've invested in recently, why they invested in it, look at their AngelList site, look at their website. You can really understand whether a good fit or not. It pays to do the homework. There are investors out there who are scam artists. So they'll go on AngelList, they'll contact you, they'll say I'm an angel investor. Anybody can say that, but they're looking to sell you a product, like an insurance product, a marketing product, a cloud service, right? And they'll meet with you and they say, well, we invest, and maybe they've done only one investment in the past 5 years, but then they'll spend all the time trying to sell you their product. Or they'll do an equity exchange, say, we'll give you free hosting in exchange for equity. And that really wasn't what you wanted. So when you get a request from an investor, don't just take the meeting, qualify them. And go back and forth on email, make sure they're real. Know your valuation. You have to know what your startup is worth because every investor is going to ask. You can ask them back what you think they're worth, but you should know what you're worth. What you're worth is pretty much a market dynamic, right? So it's what investors are willing to pay for you and what investors are paying now for similar startups. So the best way to find out what you're worth is to talk to a bunch of investors and ask them, what do you think I'm worth before you go out pitching for real? Ask friends, ask advisors and mentors who see a lot of valuations. If you can get a friend who can sign up on AngelList as an investor, you can go look and see all the valuations of the companies, and you can match yours to, oh, I'm sort of at this stage. Most of the startups I'm seeing on AngelList have this valuation. You start to get a feel for the market, right? Because that's a big enough market. Now keep in mind, if it's startups featured on AngelList, their valuations are inflated, right? Because they're the featured ones. They're the hot ones. You want to look at kind of more of the average. And you want to look at the average by region. Because your valuation in Silicon Valley is not your valuation in Beijing. It's not your valuation in London or Mumbai or any other place. Just like real estate. Everywhere you go, it's different. Also, every sector, just like you can imagine a tech sector is like a neighborhood. Right now, blockchain's really hot, right? So the valuations are up. That neighborhood is really hot, while others are depressed. You know, it's going to be much harder to get. So you need to know your valuation by sector and by city. Website, please make your website look good. Like, oh, there's so many startups that go, and you're going to type in their URL as an investor, right? Don't we all do that? We always type in their URL because we look like we're screening. We're looking for a reason to not meet with them, right? Because our time is limited. If their website looks like crap, we're on to the next one. And so you can get a web template on, ThemeForest or any of these sites that looks beautiful for $20. Just put up a really beautiful landing page that looks nice. It doesn't have to say much. It's better than having a crappy or no website. Video magic. So video is super important today. So I've seen many startups get funding just by having a great video. Do not have a crappy video. It's just like your website. It will actually hurt you. So if you're going to do a video, make it good and make it, all your video has to do, it doesn't have to go into your market, your team, all that stuff. It just has to be like those great videos you see on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. The ones that really describe your product really well. So like I said, that one point, what does your product do for customers? If you can do that really well in a very high quality way, it's worth having a video. Because I'll tell you, whenever a startup sends me a business plan or registers on a website, I'll look at the video first. And if they don't have a video, it feels tedious because all of us are lazy until we're interested. And at the beginning, we're just like going through stuff. So just like the reason these Kickstarter ones take off, and invariably the ones that take off have great videos. I mean, they do because we're the same as consumers. We're just like, investors are no different. If you have a great video, your chance of funding goes way up. So hire a real videographer, somebody who actually knows what they're doing, and have a script and work it out. And hopefully, Dollar Shave Club, right? They went through the roof. Their video was great. It was funny and it was perfect. Just look at Dollar Shave Club or any of these videos from startups that really work. And all Dollar Shave Club, they didn't talk to an investor. They just talked to the customer, right? We just want to see what the customer's buying, why they want to buy it. Cold email. Everybody says cold emails don't work. Well, not everybody. A lot of investors, but they do work. I know on Silicon Valley. I know a lot of investors, if your cold email is good, they'll respond. And they will fund you. And I've seen it happen. You know, Tim Draper, like he does it all the time. Like if you give him the right cold email, he'll meet with you and he'll write a check. It happens all the time. You know, I met with, when I was first starting out in the old days, you know, Doug Leonis, one of the heads at Sequoia Capital, I didn't know him at the time, but you know, I just emailed him cold. And he goes, oh, that's a tease, come on in. That's what he said, you know? So keep your email super short. You know, describe in the first sentence exactly what you do, right? 1 or 2 sentences, 3 bullet points on what you've achieved. You know, we won this award. You know, our team is from MIT. We are already at, we already have 400,000 users, whatever it is. And then a link to your video, hopefully, or a link to your deck if you don't have a great video. And that's it. That's all you need in a cold email. And because it's short and precise, if it hits the mark, you probably will get meetings. Kissing frogs. So this is my advice. You know. So investors are like frogs, right? We all run up and we kiss them, hoping they'll turn into Prince Charming, kick us up, carry us off, so we can live happily ever after, right? We're looking at you. We're like, well, if you kiss enough frogs, you'll find your Prince Charming that will fund your company. Well, my rule of when you're kissing frogs is only kiss the same frog 3 times. If it hasn't turned into Prince Charming, move on. So this is like, I myself made this mistake. The first startup that I was getting funded, you know, I kept going back to the same investor because they showed interest, they were kind of interested, but they never moved. You know, they never put down the money, but they were always interested. They're on the fence, you know. You do not, that's a waste of your time. Most investors, I will tell you, on the 3rd meeting, if they've met with you 3 times, if they're an angel or even a VC, if they haven't introduced you to the partner meeting by meeting number 3, that's sort of it. The partner meeting is where they make their decision. If they haven't taken you to the partner meeting by meeting number 3, it's exponential. It goes the first time, very low probability of them funding you. Second time, medium. Third time, high, and then it sort of peaks. And this is a rule of thumb. It can change, right? And then it starts to go down exponential. You know, by your 8th meeting, it's back down to like almost 0. You can be almost guaranteed you can meet with them 100 more times and they're not going to invest. They're, for some reason, they might like you or something else, but you know, or maybe they're not even actively investing. Whatever it is, you want to close on the 3rd or 4th meeting, somewhere around there. And then if they aren't willing to close, you just have to say, here's our convertible note, here's our term sheet. You know, I need you guys to make a decision because I'm very busy. We don't have time. If I can't meet with you again, you're just going to have to give me your answer. You know, whether you're interested or not. And you, at that point, after the 3rd meeting, you push what I call push for a no. You try to get them to say no. You're basically saying, I'm not going to do anything anymore unless you're willing to make a decision. And that really helps you move to the next level. Poker face. I've been in many meetings where you don't want to show what you're actually, if you're desperate for money and your company is on the verge of going under, this is usually not something you want to say to an investor. I've had startups come up to me and they've actually told me, if I don't get funded now, we're going to go under. And that does not work because they may feel really urgent, and they may want me to feel their urgency, but all I feel like is, if you're ready to give up now if I don't fund you, then you're not really committed, and I'm really not going to fund you. The other thing they'll do is they'll squeeze you. So like, I never said I was desperate now, but the VCs, they knew I was the only one they had, and they knew we were running out of money, and we had this big deal with MTV, one of my first startups, and the cash was out, and it was right before Christmas, and I went back to them, and they had promised to invest for 6 months, and they said they would write the check, and then they cut our valuation in half, because they knew we were desperate, And we walked away, and we almost went under, but then we pulled it out of the hat in January. Because they even did it to Elon Musk. They tried to take over Tesla when he really needed money. If you read his biography, they were squeezing him, and he managed to come through with other money just in time. But it'll happen. That's their job, well, as a lot of them see it. Beware. So when I'm going through this fast because I want to give us time to pitch, but when you are meeting investors, not all investors are good people. Like some are really, I've had investors that were saints. I would trust them, with my children and my bank account and everything. They were always there for me. Like even when the going got rough, they were helping me. Then I have others which were real devils. They actually, one of them I gave back millions of dollars to. What entrepreneur gives an investor back millions of dollars? Trust me. At a certain point, you're like, I'll write you the check. Just please never call me again in your life. It's that bad. So, what? I'm not saying. But it's somebody you never want to work with. And it wasn't me they did it to, it's everybody. The person was just like pathological, And then they would threaten lawsuits if I didn't know what they wanted to do. It's like, I don't want a lawsuit, I don't want to deal with you. I'm not, let's just get you away. So, life isn't worth it at a certain point. So, what you do to avoid this is just go look at what startups they funded in the past, get the names, and go on LinkedIn and, use InMail or some other way and contact those entrepreneurs. Don't ask them for recommendations because they'll only tell you the entrepreneurs who like them, right? The ones that were happy. You want to find the entrepreneurs who they don't recommend, who can tell you honestly what their experience was. And then even still, you may have to read between the lines. If they say, oh yeah, he was okay, that means he was god-awful. You never want to work with that investor again. Otherwise they're going to tell you that the investor was great. If you don't hear them going on and on about how they were really great and really helpful, run the other way. Due diligence, start today with this. Be prepared. Just make a Dropbox folder, and every time you sign an agreement, every time you do anything that could be consequential to the investors, do a copy of it in your Dropbox folder. Then it's not on Joanne's computer or Alex's computer or up on the cloud on some service that you didn't know about. All the stuff is in one place, and when due diligence times come, you can send a link to the investor, and you're done. It's all there. It's not with your lawyers, and that makes it super fast. When they say they want to do due diligence, you just send them a link and you're done. Bird in the hand. I've had many entrepreneurs go out there and try to get funding at a valuation they had in their head. But it wasn't a realistic valuation. I had one entrepreneur came to me, will remain nameless again. I'm not going to diss people. But I told him, he said his company was worth $15 million pre-money. And I'm like, dude, you have a prototype. You have a prototype. It's not 50 million pre-money. You're lucky to get 5, pre-money. And he's like, no, 15. A year and a half later, he had finally dropped